Subcommittee for Thursday, September 14th, 2017 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Kelly Britt representing Grace Gallucci.
Thank you.
Mr. Feliciano.
Present.
Ms. Richardson Scott.
Here.
Mr. Singh.
Here.
Mr. Osby. Mr. Osby is absent. Mr. Mitterholzer.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. And has anybody signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Calabrese.
Okay. Welcome. You've been very diligent about attending these meetings. We're very appreciative of that, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you and all this Sully County Council for all the help and support you've given us. I know there's a lot on the agenda. And a lot of things you're working on. I just want to throw one more thing on the table. And Dale, you might know if it fits or where it might fit, either within this committee or within county government. I know we talked today about the MCO sales tax and how that's going to what we think may or may not happen there. But either way, RTA has on the books today a fare increase scheduled for August of next year of 25 cents. And our board approved a two-step fare increase last year. We need the money so we can keep providing the services we provide. However, at the same time, we know very well, and this was well articulated by our customers in 16 public meetings where about 1,000 people yelled at me last year, saying that for many of our customers, not all, but for many of them, paying that additional 25 cents is a real financial burden. And we believe them. We know that is true. And we certainly know that for many of those same people, public transit is the lifeline and only way they can get to necessary services. So what can we do about it? One thing we're doing is we're developing, and we'll certainly love to do this with the county, kind of an information brochure for people who need social services. Again, what bus routes take them where and how best to provide that connectivity, which I think will be a great benefit. But secondly, what can be done, and this is something that RTA doesn't feel that it can do, how can we charge individuals fares based on their ability to pay? I can't determine someone waiting at the front of a bus what their ability to pay is, but there might be another entity that can. This is a cry for a partnership, maybe RTA and the county and some foundation. Maybe some entity can buy RTA passes, maybe at a discount, further subsidize those to give to people who fall below a poverty level. This is something that we'd love to pursue, with the county. You might have some great ideas on how to develop a partnership that would really help a lot of people on the low end of the economic scale, but those people who are so very dependent on public transit, and the situation could even get worse next year when fares do go up an extra 25 cents. It's so important. I just wanted to bring that up at the table here. It's something I'd love to work with someone on, which I think will be a great benefit to the citizens of this county. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I definitely believe that falls within the purview of this committee, so I appreciate your putting that on the table. And the next, has anybody else signed in?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the July 11th, 2017 meeting. Those minutes are attached to the agenda. Is there a motion on the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes from July 11th. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. And the ayes have it, and the minutes are approved from July 11th. No matters of legislation referred to the committee, and so we are going to move on to the first item on the discussion agenda, but before we do, I'd like to recognize Mr. Kraus, who just came in the room, and also to publicly congratulate him on his victory in the primary election. It was a race in which the two top finishers finished very, very close to each other, with Eddie marginally in the lead. So it will be a very competitive race in November. So we wish you the best of success.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay. The first item is an update on the MCO sales tax, and just for a little bit of background and context, as I'm sure everybody knows, the change in federal policy on MCO sales tax affects both county governments and transit systems that use sales tax. And in the case of RTA, the annual impact is somewhere in the area of $20 million per year. And the executive sent a budget to the legislature that did not provide for any permanent replacement of that lost revenue. However, it did provide for a transition payment. Actually, it's two payments, but together these two payments essentially replace approximately 1 year of lost revenue. There was widespread discussion of this issue in the legislature. All of us up here and many in Columbus felt that we need a much more permanent solution, that a 1 year fix is not what's needed. And in response to that discussion, very late in the legislative process in the conference committee, an alternative was developed that would have provided an essentially full replacement for, I believe, up to 8 years. And this solution was approved by the legislature and sent to Governor Kasich and then vetoed. And following the veto, the governor vetoed something like 54 items or so out of the budget bill, and a couple weeks later, this came back to the Ohio House, and the Ohio House overrode the veto on 11 items, including this one. It then went to the Senate, and the Senate took no action on any of the vetoes for a considerable length of time. And then in late August held a meeting and I believe overrode a few of them, but deferred action on this one and said that we want to get the legislators, the local governments, the transit authorities, and the governor together and to try to work out a solution. And we're going to try to do that and come back in 2 weeks on September 6th and hopefully we'll have an agreement. But if there's no agreement, then we might vote on the override. Well, September 6th came and went. Legislative leaders said we're still in discussion, that we're making progress, but we're not there yet. And that's still where we remain today. My understanding is is that what they're discussing is finding the resources to create what would be a 2-year fix instead of a 1-year fix. And if they do the 2-year fix, then the fix would extend through the entire length of the current biennium. And the idea would be we're going to fix it as far as this budget cycle extends, and not decide now, but defer to the next budget cycle as to whether we're going to create something longer lasting or permanent, or whether the 2 years is it. So that's kind of my understanding of where we're at, and I would invite any of the panel, if you have any additional information, to share it at this time. Any further information? Yes, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is, as far as the Dolan Amendment that was essentially repassed by the House, that even with a Senate vote, essentially the federal government, the CMS office, and Health and Human Services wouldn't approve of essentially a change waiver from the state of Ohio based on the amount that it would tax health insurers, which essentially has been made clear by kind of the policy statements by the Health and Human Services Secretary, Tom Price, and Seema Verma at CMS. I'm kind of curious if you have any, this is the first time I'm hearing about the 2-year fix, and I was just curious if you had any information on where they were looking to find those funds, or if it was just general fund expenditure.
First, I appreciate you bringing that up. That yes, of course, we don't know until we apply to the federal government what the answer would be, but there is pretty widespread belief that there's a high risk of disapproval. So that's appropriate, and the 2-year fix would not involve that solution. It would involve using funds that are available locally, that where there would be no risk of a federal disapproval. But what specifically they're talking about, I have not heard, and that's probably what the hang-up is. The one positive thing I would note is that for the first time in a number of months, the most recent report showed an uptick in state revenue. The most recent reports have come in better than expected, so that could create some additional resources. So that's kind of where we are, and they say, well, we expect to know in a few weeks whether there's a deal or not, but it's the goalposts kind of get moved back. The other question I would want to ask, and Director Calabrese or Mr. Feliciano, you could help on this, is that as I understand what you're dealing with, if we don't get any better solution, and the 1-year fix is all we get, that after the 1-year fix is over, even a 25% fare increase wouldn't be enough to solve the problem. That there would need to be substantially more in terms of either fare increases or service reduction or both. Am I right about that, or could the 25-cent fare increase make up for the loss of the MCO revenue?
Yes, if I can, thank you. The answer is no. The 25-cent fare increase was instituted without any knowledge of the roughly $18 million loss in fares. Again, that was instituted by the board so that we could keep our current level of service moving forward. That would have no impact. If I can additionally, I've heard as many or more people feel that I've heard only a few people who said they didn't think this would be approved by the federal government. I've heard many more people in the know think that it would be approved. So those who are most pessimistic are associated with the current administration in Columbus. So, I mean, really, bottom line is nobody knows, but we certainly would welcome any negotiated settlements better than a non-negotiated settlement. So we hope that's one that actually does work out. But you're right, Mr. Chair. Something would have to be done. I have staff working on a number of different options. None of them are pretty in terms of how would we cut $19 million out of our system. I assure you there's very, very little slack on our system. We've been cutting this system every year. We've gone through multiple system redesigns. Everyone thinks a system redesign may be the panacea. We did one in 2004, 2010, and 2012. Systems that are going through a system redesign are systems that haven't looked at their route schedules and route network in 40 or 50 years. They're doing that in Akron right now. But because we've been in this constant state of financial crisis, that's been an ongoing process. The biggest benefactor of a system redesign would be the many companies are trying to sell us their services to try to help us through the process.
One question, if I might follow up, Mr. Director. You said that you're looking at a number of options if you have to replace the $18 million. Is asking for an increase in the sales tax one of the options you're looking at?
Chairman Miller, with all due respect, that's something you'd have to pose to our Board of Trustees. Again, that is something that was discussed. It is a long way out. I'm hoping we don't have to go there, but again, we either have to generate more revenue someplace or figure out how to cut expenses somewhere. There really is no third option.
Okay, well, I would just mention there's been some very, very initial internal discussion over here around at least learning what the process would be for doing that if that became an option to consider. So,
Yes, thank you.
okay, fine. Okay, so that's the update on MCO sales tax. Let's hope that by the time of the next meeting that we have some good news to report, that we have more than the 1-year fix as a reality. So we'll go on to item B, which is the creation of a successor organization. And as I'm sure everyone by now knows, that this committee's authorization extends only through the end of 2017. It's designed to be not a permanent thing, but a way of doing some focused research in the area of public transportation and identifying some alternatives and recommendations and things that could be done locally that might help. And one of the things that has been suggested and in fact initiated by our Vice President, Ms. Conwell, is the idea that when we're done here, that there should be a permanent organization led by some of the area's top leaders to do ongoing advocacy work on behalf of public transportation. And so there is an item that came along with your materials today, a list that has been generated of potential participants in the successor public transportation organization. And so I call your attention to that. And I would kind of suggest for your consideration as a next step that if we continue to feel that this is something that we ought to do, that I think the next step might be to approach 5 or 6 of the key political leaders, the county executive, the mayor of Cleveland, the president of Cleveland City Council, the president of county council, one or a couple of congressional representatives, and see if they also support this approach and would be willing to participate. And if we had their buy-in, that would take us a significant step toward being able to make this happen. So I throw that out as a suggestion and invite your comment on that or any other comment regarding the successor organization.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Britt.
I'm taking it, it'll probably be very difficult to get all these people together at a certain time, but I would offer up NOACA as a meeting space.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Grace has probably put that up before, but just to have a centralized location, and that a lot of these people on the list are on our board as well. So reaching out would not be too hard to do. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you. Ms. Conwell.
Can you send the schedule on the NOACA board? So that the majority usually meets after the NOACA. That would be an ideal time since we have most of the people there. So can we work on that together?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
The other point I would put out is this list is quite long, and so I think we'd have to think in terms of a steering committee of a smaller number of key players that could help lead the organization. We're not yet toward questions of organizational structure and governance, but I'm thinking about that down. It obviously could not have this large of a group as the leadership. Okay. Any other comments or questions on the successor organization?
Just wondering, Mr. Chair, if NOACA has the capability of maybe a virtual conference meeting or phone. Do you have
Virtual, no. I mean, we have some big screens and a lot of tech for probably some call-in, but like actual virtual, we haven't moved up to that just yet.
But the call thing would be a good.
Yes, we can do that.
Do people feel that we should go ahead and approach the community leadership on this suggestion.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed from this list that it's noticeably absent that you do not have the Fund for Economic Future. I imagine that the intent when you put economic development was to list that organization, but we would be remiss if we did not incorporate them, especially in light of some of the work that they're currently doing. And we know that based on the presentation that Carol Caruso made to us. When was that? That was in April or May? I forget when that was.
Okay, thank you for that. They're now on the list. Okay. Any other comments, suggestions? Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. For a couple of these, we have folks who are either kind of already engaged in the process of this subcommittee or have presented. I think just over the coming months, like figuring out who, in terms of be good representatives from especially some of the major players to the Greater Cleveland Partnership, essentially who's going to be their person who really is going to engage with this long term. For example, right now the Amazon bids, no cities in Ohio can even compete for these. Like with the amount of transit that's really being asked for, to get these kind of headquarters. So who are really putting those kind of bids together, whether it's at the city economic development office, at the GCP. I'm glad we have Mr. Krause here from the county economic development office, and really be thinking about like kind of who these specific folks are going to be, just so we can get that participation, really on the front end once we're on to the next steps.
Okay. That's a good point. That with these larger organization, you actually, it can't be generic. You need someone specific within that organization that takes this on as their project and represents the organization. I would just comment that I've been a part of the Aerozone Alliance. Eddie, you're familiar with it. You attended some of their meetings, and the Aerozone Alliance is a consortium of NASA and the airport and the city of Cleveland and the county and 5 of the surrounding communities, and they're working on trying to leverage proximity to the airport and NASA into economic development spin-offs, and we've been putting this together, but the structural questions involved in making this into an effective collaboration and a properly governed organization, it's been a slow process, and sometimes felt a little bit like watching paint dry, and so the collaborations are becoming more and more complex in the 21st century, and I think what we have in mind here is a pretty complex collaboration that I think will be good for our community if we can pull it off. But the structural questions involved in it isn't anymore that you can get a half a dozen people together, sign a few documents, and voila, you have a functioning organization. It's got a whole lot more complex. But fortunately, from the work at the Aerozone Alliance, I know some folks over at Cleveland State University who are kind of experts on this kind of thing, so we might get them involved in this at some point. So, anything else about the successor organization? Okay.
Talked about this in a previous meeting. how many did you think members should be for the steering committee of this large group? What did you have in mind?
Something like a half a dozen, but it's early and we're flexible, but just so it's manageable and not unwieldy. So, okay. Any further discussion? Okay. We'll move on to item C, which is the outline of the committee's final report, and I would call your attention to the other document, this is just a first draft. It should be labeled as such, and I'll tell you where this came from. In the late spring, Khalil Saran, our staff person, and Yvonne and I made a presentation on the work of the committee to the county executive, and in preparation for that meeting, Khalil prepared a summary of the various topics we've been working on, and an initial take on what our committee's final report might look like, and this document is actually a successor to that. So there's a lot of owing to Khalil on this, but before we sunset in December, we're gonna put out a report on this committee's work, and I see it as consisting of three main parts. First, an introduction showing the history, rationale, and purpose of the committee and the committee's goals and objectives. And secondly, the research findings, what we've learned about all the various subjects that we've looked into. And speaking of Khalil, welcome to the committee. We're talking about the first draft of the outline of the committee's final report, and I was telling the committee how much this report depends on the report that you prepared for the meeting that we had with the county executive in the late spring. That this draft here just builds on that document, and so we see the final report as having three parts: an introductory part on the committee's history, rationale, purpose, goals, and objectives, and then a second part of research findings, what we've learned about all the various topics that we've looked into during the committee's operation, and then a third section, which is our recommendations, and those recommendations will include creating the leadership level successor organization that we've talked about. I would call your attention to a new item, number 5, that we discussed earlier today. Recommendations to RTA regarding options for restoring funding lost due to the policy change on MCO sales tax. Hopefully, by the time that we need to prepare this report, a better solution will have been found downstate, and we won't need to include that item. But if we do, I think that it'll need to be a pretty substantial area of discussion for our committee in the last 3 months or so that we have to work with. So So I invite all of you to just look at this draft report, this draft outline, to think about it, think about what should be added or deleted, and forward us suggestions, and in a month, another month or so, we should have a pretty final version of the outline, and then we can use the outline to start writing the actual report, and hopefully have a draft of the report for you sometime in November and have a couple meetings to review and work with before we end in December. So that's kind of where we are on that, and if there's any comments about that at this time, we're open to that.
I don't know if this is to you or to Mr. Calabrese. In the research findings, just who would it fall under item G, where we need to work cooperatively, not competitively, with people like Uber? Are we going to take on that, or Joe, have your organization been working on that? I think that's a good thing, but I don't know.
Yes, without a doubt. Certainly, we have been working cooperatively with Uber and local taxis. Again, I think the key is, and the terminology in the industry is first mile and last mile. How do you get to the train and then from the train? So there are 11, the Federal Transit Administration, it kind of is our bank, so they have some control over us. They initially were very skeptical of such relationships. They have 11 pilot programs going on around the country right now. Those will help develop what we can and cannot do. If you go to our transit app on your phone today, it'll give you not just the public transit option, but the Uber option to get there. So it is a relationship. We're working with them in terms of subsidizing a piece of the Uber ride to get to public transit. So that's an ongoing discussion, I think, around the industry and certainly here in Greater Cleveland as well.
Anything else? Okay. So I'd like to go on to the next item, and I just have a little hornet's nest that I've stirred up here, and I just want to see what people have to think about it. It has to do with the area of transit-oriented development and bringing transit to job centers. It's the question of should we be insisting that the jobs be located near public transit, and that we stop creating jobs out in far-flung areas that it's hard for transit to get to, or should we take the attitude of well, the jobs go to the areas that can support them, and if jobs go places, well, then public transit has to be responsible, and we have to find ways to get public transit out to where the jobs are, and so I'm just wondering whatever anybody thinks about how you resolve that dilemma. Okay, Ms. Conwell, and then Mr. Singh.
Well, I think item G, Councilman, if we could work out a partnership with Uber, we can also do the reverse. So if we are trying to work on getting the Uber individuals to an RTA line, maybe we could also do something in reverse, an RTA line where it stops. Uber can pick up and take to some of these places. There's some, unfortunately, on the backs of the individuals in the hurricanes. There's Teletech, which is located. Our only office is located in Westlake. And I don't know any bus that goes on Westlake, but I constantly have people coming to me saying, I need a job. I need a temporary job, or I need something to get me to the next month or until I can find something else. So when I tell them about Teletech, you know, you can go on a computer, they answer you right back. The problem many of them have is how they're going to get to Teletech. And these are good jobs, even though they're temporary, paying $18 an hour. So there's jobs out here and available. We just got to work together countywide. How do we get our folks, to them? So that would be my suggestion, is if we could reverse this and get an agreement with Uber to maybe pick them up at wherever the transit lays off and get them right to the place. I mean, I think the industry would expand.
Mr. Singh and then Mr. Mitterholzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to encourage, especially within the county level, that we think about, Ms. Britt had given this presentation on NOACA's TOD typologies, how to identify and think about where we're going to locate, new development as it relates to transit, that we already have transit assets that we're not taking full advantage of. With both the city of Cleveland and the county, we have a lot of, hopefully tools that we can be using to specifically be targeting, encouragement and any subsidies that are going, that making sure that they're prioritized for transit-oriented corridors. I think right now, for example, at the East 105, I'm still really excited to see the Thrive 105 as it's finalized, because there's really important corridors that, if we're paying attention to, we can develop already, getting transit service that aren't really at their potential right now. I think the other thing I was going to add was that right now downtown Columbus has been doing for the state of Ohio pretty visionary work in terms of getting right now 40,000 workers who are going to be getting transit passes for their commutes downtown to Columbus. And that kind of intention is really, I think, the kind of thing that we want in our business community, as well as that kind of partnership with our transit agency. If I might suggest, I think the folks who are doing this probably the most aggressively are at University Circle Incorporated. I'm talking to Annie Peace, who I would love for her to be able to present to the committee, and Sarah O'Keefe with UH's. So Annie Peace, she's the transportation coordinator for PEASE, and I'd be happy to get in touch and connect us. And Sarah O'Keefe, who is the sustainability director at University Hospital. Not director, I'm sorry, she's in their office. And they've been, I think, really...
Annie Peace is at
UCI.
UCI.
Yeah, and
okay.
and I think, I don't know, Joe, what percentage of the commuter benefits folks are in University Circle, but I imagine a significant amount of them are coming in from University Circle and downtown. And just really that University Circle Incorporated is working, I think, in a best practice for Cleveland with their major employers to be able to help facilitate more transit commutes.
Okay. Mr. Mitterholzer.
Mr. Chair, I currently serve as the chair of an organization called the Funders Network for Smart Growth and Livable Communities. It's a group that services philanthropy and organizations like mine that support smart growth policies. There are plenty of examples across the country that have made these decisions. They've said that they're going to stay within a certain border, and they have created transit. They've used existing transit and then built new transit based within borders. There's a direct correlation to how strong they are economically. And I think that you're asking the right question. If you look at the Twin Cities as a great example, they've been able to expand their transit, but within their footprint. They aren't going all over. They're being very deliberate about where those expansions occur. And as a result, you're seeing inner city growth. You're seeing corporate 500s remain in the city core. So I think that this is absolutely the right question to be asking. And then I would point to a body of research that was funded 5 years ago, the Sustainable Communities research that was done here in the region, that showed that if we continue to grow, we haven't grown. What we've done is rearrange the deck chairs. So if we continue to spread out with no growth, which is what is projected for over the next 25 years, we will only further hurt ourselves economically. So I think this is an absolutely critical question to be asking. And in a state that provides almost zero transit funding, asking RTA to continuously reach further and further out means that something has to be cut on those lines. So I just think that I thank you for asking this hard question. I think this is the right question for the region to be asking, and I think we have a body of research that shows how important it is that we don't continue to have the kind of growth, or the expansion of where we live with no population increase. So I think this is a really important question.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Well, the people who did the 2040 modeling found the exact same thing.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just to echo the colleagues here, I just wanted to reiterate that, yes, that's part of the reason why we did the Tourism-Oriented Development Plan, was to show existing infrastructure and where we could develop that's already existing. I think without using it directly, but fix it first. Like, don't expand and move out when you have available infrastructure that's available for different types of development, transit-oriented development, job growth. We as a region, as John said, we need to come together and figure out how to incentivize companies to come into what a lot of folks don't like to say, but it's called growth boundaries. You don't want to expand out from a certain place, and we're only going to keep everything tightly in. And if you want to go out to the exurb, that's on you, but don't look for us to incentivize your move. So I think it's very important for us to do that. And that was a very important question that you brought up. So that's why we did all the work. I actually worked on the Sustainable Communities Consortium as well. So I've been saying this and preaching this for many years. So I'm just glad to see that it's actually coming out to the forefront.
On a positive note, the county recently supported a residential development that's located just a couple blocks away from the West 65th Rapid Station. So that's definitely a transit orient. Couple. Yeah, it's very close. Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, those apartments, the 40 apartments, all come with a monthly RTA pass.
Great. Okay. Any other comment? Well, that was a very good discussion. Thank you for that. Okay. Now, I know that that RTA recently sent a representative to the Transit Center's system redesign conference, and we know that system redesign is not new to RTA, and you've done system redesigns in the past, but I'm wondering if either John or Joe could give us any sense of whether you learned anything that you hadn't heard before from that conference.
No, we've not learned anything we hadn't known before. As I said, there are several consultants around the country right now trying to sell their services to come in and help redesign transit systems that, again, have not looked at their route network for many, many years. And really, it's a reallocation of resources, because the resources are fixed or even fixed and shrinking. As I mentioned before, we've been doing that. We did a major redesign in 2004 when we, to many people's dismay, cut out the community circulators because they weren't cost effective, and we added the downtown trolleys downtown, which are very, very effective. But in doing this, you have to take from someone to give to someone else, and it's always a very difficult process. But we did another, major redesign coming out of the recession, 2008 and 2009, another one just a few years ago. So I think, as I mentioned last meeting or the meeting before, I have a very, very professional staff. one that the Transit Center would love to hire to do the redesigns in other cities. So it's an ongoing process for us. It's something we certainly will look at, but there is really no panacea there. There really isn't for RTA. Again, we've been, when I, hopefully through no fault of my own, but when I came to Cleveland, we had 3,200 employees. Now we have 2,500. So we've been, and again, we've been trying to, we look at, our lowest performing routes in 3 different segments 4 different times a year and make adjustments based on that. So it's an ongoing process. We've become much more efficient, but there's no secret pill out there to cut $18 million of cost out of our system. We've gone through that stuff, and we've done that. So we can look at it. Again, I've got a reorganization coming internally in my organization, and we're bringing them. We're going to have a very new creative person in charge of our operations division very soon. I'm sure that person, he or she, will look at it again, but it has been an ongoing process.
Well, I know when they came to Cleveland in the spring, they were particularly pushing the notion of identifying a smaller number of high-frequency routes and kind of creating a crosshash so that you could get from one place to another along these high-frequency routes. Is that the gist of what they were presenting at their conference, or was it somewhat different?
No, it's pretty much looking at route utilization and taking, again, reallocating. Redesigns work much better if you've got new resource going to add service. They don't work quite as well when you're trying to reduce service. Mm-hmm. The services we have are all pretty well utilized today. We've cut the fat out of the system, and now every time we pull a service out to put a service on another route, you have a number of individuals, and they're mostly going to be low-income people that are transit dependent. They're going to say, take their service away and provide it to some other area. As many of us know, it's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Okay, I appreciate the comments, and we're always looking for solutions, but it's also good to know when there's only limited increments that can be obtained from particular approaches, and so there's a certain amount of that in place here. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one follow-up question for Joe. Is there any ridership both ridership and essentially a financial amount that would be impacted by having transfers brought back into the essentially the fare? And essentially, how do transfers impact ridership, and then what would the financial burden of having that again be?
It would mean less revenue. Less revenue means less service. And I think we're trying to go in the opposite direction from that.
Right. I'm saying in terms of a kind of what that financial burden would look like, and what ballpark we would be talking about.
I don't have that information on me. The service planning people might. And by the way, the 25, 26, and 55 all serve Teletech.
Any further discussion? Okay. Well, looking forward to our next 2 meetings. They're on Thursday, September the 28th at 1 o'clock, and Thursday, October the 12th at 1 o'clock. And I'm thinking about if there's nothing new to report on MCO, I don't know that we need to meet again in 2 weeks. We might make October 12th the next meeting. So watch your email, and in the next week or so we'll make a decision on that and let you know. So I think hopefully at our next meeting we'll have something relatively definitive on MCO sales tax and be able to figure out where we need to proceed from. And then in the meantime, we'll reach out to the leadership community on the successor organization and start working on that, and hopefully have something further to report, and hopefully at the next meeting we'll come pretty close to finalizing the outline for the final report and start working on the writing. So that's kind of where we are. Any further discussion of any kind for the good of the committee? Hearing none, the next question is whether anybody has signed in for public comment unrelated to the agenda,
No,
or for
Mr.
any reason.
No, Mr. Chair.
No one signed in. Okay, there being no further business, this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.